The Edgar Cayce Guide to Self-Healing by Patrick J. Berkery. 8. The Soul according to Edgar Cayce. A person who knows how to develop the self, and complies with the laws of nature and of God, can really accomplish great and wonderful things. All this is open to those who, like Cayce, freely and willingly give of themselves to the powers within. Let us now look at the third component of the triune entity, which is the soul or spirit. What does Cayce say? What then, the entity asks, is a soul? What does it look like? What is its plane of experience or activity? How may ye find one? It may not be separated in a material world from its own place of abode in the body physical, yet the soul looks through the eyes of the body, it handles with the emotions of the sense of touch. It may be aware through the factors in every sense, and thus add to its body, as much as the food of the material world has made for a growing physical body, in which the soul may, and does indeed dwell, in its passage, or activity in any individual phase of an experience in the earth. What is the soul of a body? That which the Maker gave to every entity, or individual in the beginning, and which is seeking the home or place of the Maker. Does the soul ever die? May be banished from the Maker, not death. What is the subconscious mind of the body? An attribute of the soul or mind of the soul. The soul is an individuality, that may grow to be one with, or separate from, the whole. According to Cayce, all souls were created at once, of spirit, or God. It is comparable to a great ball of fire shooting off sparks, or parts of itself, into the physical creation of the earth. Each soul spins through time and space as an offspring of the Creator, lacking in soul experience. The soul's awareness or consciousness of creation was to be later recorded within the skeins of time and space, as God's Book of Remembrance, and frequently referred to as the Akashic Records, or the Book of Life. In this record, no experience is ever lost. Every thought, word, deed, experience and relationship is programmed in the unconscious memory of each individual. What is the longing of the soul? Each soul wants to return to at-one-ment with the creative source, which is God. But it's not that easy. There are lessons to be learned. The soul has to experience creation. Within our own solar system, according to Cayce, we have developed our emotional bodies or emotions during many incarnations in the flesh. Our mental attributes or attitudes have been developed during interim-planetary experiences between our Earth lives. Each individual has to learn the lesson to be learned while in the Earth experiences. Who determines what must be learned? It's all set by the individual's soul purpose and ideals. But that does not lock out the interplay of free will, always a valuable commodity in the Cayce scheme of things. Then a soul, the offspring of a creator, entering into a consciousness that became a manifestation in any plane or sphere of activity, given that free will for its use of those abilities, qualities, conditions in its experience, demonstrates, manifests, shows forth, that it reflects in its activity towards that first cause. Hence in the various spheres that man sees, that are demonstrated, manifested, in and before self, even in a material world, all forces, all activities, are a manifestation. Then, that which would be the companionable, the at-oneness with, the ability to be one with, becomes necessary for the demonstration or manifestation of those attributes in and through all force, all demonstration, in a sphere. The spiritual nature of man, or soul, is thought of as a unit of energy, was created by God years and years before the creation of the earth. And the purpose of the soul is to help bring creation to flower. Our souls, in a series of incarnations as humans in the earth, build through their choices, free will, their whole condition of body and mind at any given level of expression. Our attitudes and emotions clearly mirror our state of being. Our attitudes and emotions are how we review our growth patterns. We look at them, and we can see what state of development we have thus far achieved. They are a way of measuring thoughts, words and actions in the light of the universal laws. Through the soul we are enabled to bring about a more creative, spiritually centered life experience. I choose to think that each one of us has an individual soul, that there is one Spirit, the Spirit of God, going through each and every one that makes each and every one of us akin. That makes all life and nature akin, for life in every form is dependent upon that force we call God. For as matter came into being, it was permeated with the Spirit of God that gives life, with its ability to carry itself on, and make of itself that which has been determined by God, that it should be. Man only, who was chosen to be one with God and a companion with him from the beginning, chose rather to go his own way, as Adam, but he has prepared a way, through the Christ, who came into the world that we through him might have life and have it more abundantly, that we might be more conscious of all periods of our development of the life of God that is within us. See John 10 verse 10. Christ himself taught that we must test the spirits, and they that acknowledge Jesus the Christ has come in the flesh are born of God. The truth makes alive, and the life makes you free. As created by God in the first, are souls perfect, and if so, why any need of development? In this we find only the answer in this, the evolution of life, as may be understood by the finite mind. In the first cause, or principle, all is perfect. In the creation of soul, we find the portion may become a living soul and equal with the Creator. To reach that position, when separated, must pass through all stages of development, that it may be one with the Creator. Have the lower forms of creation, such as animals, should, or do they have any life in the spirit plane? All have the spirit force. The man, as made, carrying the soul force, that made equal with the Creator in the beginning, in that of relative production in its or man's plane of existence. Hence the necessity of development of that soul energy. Only when reached in that of the man, do we find the soul complete in the earth's entities, for in man we find both the spirit entity and the physical entity, as we see exemplified in this body, mind, here of 900. Cayce uses the symbol of light to convey the power of the soul. For the soul seeks its own, in him, who is the light, the life, the way. And when there are rebellions of body or mind against such, is there any wonder that the atoms of the body cause high blood pressure, or cause itching, or cause running sores, or cause a rash, or cause indigestion? For, all of these are but the rebellion of truth and light, error and correction in a physical body. For thy body is indeed the temple of the living God. God moved and said, Let there be light, and there was light, not the light of the sun, but rather that of which, through which, in which every soul had, has, and ever has its being. For in truth ye live and love and have thy being in him. What is the life of a soul? Or how does the soul move and operate? Cayce tells us that this takes place through the body that the soul inhabits. But there is also the reality of what is called spiritual energy or vitality. Spiritual element, the vitality, produces the motive forces of the entity, whether physical or spiritual. Spiritual forces being the life, the reproductive principle, the soul the development principle. The spiritual contact is made through the glandular forces of creative energies. Thus we find the connection, the association of the spiritual being with the mental self, at those centers from which the reflexes react to all of the organs, all of the emotions, all of the activities of a physical body. Spirit or soul is that which we can comprehend only by the application of it, by what we do for someone else. Of course, we cannot expect to see the soul of self or of another on this earth. We can perceive or sense the invisible face. But what we cannot see of the soul cannot even be perceived by the five senses. But this does not prevent us from studying along lines of thought how the inner man, or the soul, develops. We have to accept the existence of the soul, even though we cannot touch it or feel it. For we all know that within each of us is that something we call soul, the entity, the being. We know that this lives on and on, long after we have shed the body. The attributes of the soul and the spirit are as many, and as many more, as the attributes of the physical and mental mind. Each soul, in the beginning, was endowed with the same condition and position. Each, in itself, is building to itself, by means of its development through the ages, as they manifest upon the earth plane. That there are identical souls, no. No two leaves of a tree, no two blades of grass are the same. They are the complement one to another, yes. Look on the individuality of the individual, and know that comes from the spiritual, and not from the personal self. Each soul is a universe in itself. The soul must ever remain one, because it is really made in the image of the Creator. For while the body changes, for it, too, must be purified, the soul remains ever as one. For it is in the image of the Creator, and has its birthright in Him. And if this birthright is sold for the satisfying of those urges of earthly desires, they become stumbling blocks in the experience, and thus the entity finds itself constantly in each and every environ meeting itself, either mentally, materially, physically, in the environs and in the experiences, which are a portion of each and every soul. Hence we find those influences arising in the present experience. For ever is a soul, an entity, meeting itself, in its shortcomings, in that wherein it has missed or chosen in the improper direction. For remember, the good lives on, and is magnified. The errors become then as stumbling stones, as to be kept or to be turned into stepping stones, into those directions and ways as to be the more perfect way, or as expressed, a more excellent way. Dream. Someone, probably myself, was looking up to corner of a tent of some kind and the person, probably me, seemed to be ordering God. As is seen in this emblematical form, the entity gains through this the understanding wherein the spiritual forces in the physical being may so magnify self's interests, as to come under that direct influence of those spiritual laws. And as the tents represent to the entity the insecure dwelling, and the looking up and ordering to the high and holy, that which the entity, through the prayer of the righteous many may be saved, and as the ordering is then to self, to so direct life in self as to be in that closer accord, closer touch, that the orders from the highest may be through that channel from which entity has seen much development, see. Well that in this connection entity read Jude, especially 10th, 11th and 12th verses. What can hurt the soul? What can keep us from the spiritual development so necessary to maintain our level of healing? Dream. I was shaving and cut some of the side hair off from my temple. It hurt. In this there is given the emblematical condition of how that to remove from self some of those conditions that hinder the best developing may, in the way of fleshly desire, be a hurt to the individual, yet as the necessity of keeping that portion of face in the way that gives the more perfect satisfaction, same is often necessary, that self take stock, as it were, of self's actions in mental, moral and physical ways, that the forces of the entity may be better magnified in the way of that the entity may show forth the works of Him who gives all good and perfect gifts. True, an individual, a soul, must become less and less of self, or thoughts of self, yet when those activities of others in relationships to the mental, the spiritual, the soul developments, are such that the own soul development and own soul expression becomes in jeopardy, then, as He hath given, I came not to bring peace but a sword. I came to give peace, not as the world counts peace, but as that which makes for those experiences wherein the soul, the entity, is to fulfill those purposes, those activities, for which it, the soul entity, came into being. Self-healers must work towards developing the powers of the soul. That means they should seek spiritual development as a first priority, if they would balance the body and mind with the soul. Should I pursue psychic development? Pursue rather spiritual development, this is of the psychic nature, yes, but find the spirit first, not spiritualism, but spirituality in thy own life. That the entity comes seeking indicates that it is of the house of Israel, and, seeking, there may indeed come that answer which will enable the entity to use this present experience as a stepping stone for the unfoldment of a greater experience and walk with the consciousness of the spiritual life. For these are they that prevent individuals from growing lonely or overwise. 4. Those that would seek knowledge and understanding seek same early, and when they are old they will not depart from that consciousness. From the Cayce readings it is obvious that the path to proper spiritual development is twofold. The proper exercise and appreciation of one's freedom. The bold acceptance of responsibility for one's purpose and destiny. These two qualities, freedom and responsibility, are therefore essential to the development of a self-healer, for in growing along these paths, he heightens his own power of creation, thereby bringing himself into closer contact with the creative force, in whom we move and have our being. Freedom, Cayce says, is the birthright of each soul. The will is the factor that, in choice, is the birthright, and that is only sold for appetites that gratify for the moment the self-desires or self-indulgences. And what the entity does about that free will, that is the heritage of each soul, as its birthright, the will, makes for development or retardment, and nothing may separate thee from the knowledge of the Father but thyself. True choice or freedom means the abolition of unfounded judgments, those that do not have value of a spiritual depth. However, there should not be judgments other than as of the spiritual nature or value, and not as to anyone's moral code, but as to purposes of same. Know that the birthright of every soul is choice, or will. Choosing then to do that which is to self an expression of creative force, or love, may to the entity become a stumbling stone in the experience, or the lives of others, and yet to the entity a natural physical emotion, or expression of a spiritual law, a spiritual desire. This may be hard for some to interpret, but it has become a natural thing for the entity because of its experiences not only in this sojourn, but in others, yet the entity must adhere to that which is the ideal. 4. That is the way and the truth and the light. The will is that which enables us to come close to the Creator, the ultimate source of all healing. With each development, that force, known upon the plane as will, is given to man over and above all creation, that force that may separate itself from its maker, for with the will, man may either adhere or contradict the divine law, those immutable laws, as are set between the Creator and the created. Are thy choices according to thy ideal? This he alone may answer, ye must answer. For, as he hath given, ye must pay every whit. For the law of the Lord is perfect, it may convert the soul. But the law is not taken away, it must be fulfilled every whit, every jot and tittle. Under what law choosest thou to be aware, or to work? These are choices of men, as there are choices by man according to the concept of the spiritual law of the adherences to moral standard. Our will, then, is the key to freedom as a self-healer. We must choose to do right and then exert our wills in that direction. For will is that developing factor with which an entity chooses or builds that freedom, or that of being free, knowing the truth as is applicable in the experience, and in the various experiences, as has been builded, for that builded must be met, whether in thought or in deed, for thoughts are deeds, and their current run is through the whole of the influence in an entity's experience. Hence, as was given, he that hateth his brother has committed as great a sin as he that slayeth a man, for the deed is as of an accomplishment in the mental being, which is the builder for every entity. 4. Each soul enters the material plane for the fulfilling of a purpose, that it, the soul, may be one with the creative forces. And when such is allowed to be overridden, because of the application for material gains, or for self-indulgence, or self-glorification, or for self-exaltation, then stumbling blocks are in the experience. One's development, as a self-healer, is really born of our experience. We have to apply our will toward development. We must constantly examine ourselves to see whether we have, as Cayce puts it, allowed ourselves to be used by the environment and become subject to the environment, Or have we developed self through the will, towards our own hereditary position, for all the children of God? In latent urges, two great influences are apparent. They may be compared to hereditary and environmental influences in the material plane. But these, of the real self, are the spiritual environments, the spiritual heredity. Spiritual heredity, then, is a combination of what the entity or soul has done with its opportunities for creative influence in this and all other experiences. That inherited is what the entity has made of such. The spiritual environment is the sphere of activity in which such influences have found expression, whether in this or in the other environs of this same solar system, much as the manners of activities in the earth have been in the various classes, the various ages, the various periods through which each soul passes. What has our will and its freedom brought us to? Man is capable of doing anything if he chooses, and puts some energy behind the choice. If we want to break the bad habit of procrastinating or some other habit, we should follow Cayce's advice. Change our mind, choose to do something other than the habit. Replace the involuntary action, which is the habit, with something constructive. For each soul, each mind, each entity is endowed with its choice. And the choice is the result of the application of self in relationships to that which is its ideal, and finds manifestation in what individuals call habit, or subconscious activity. Yet it has its inception in that of choice. So many of our diseases are linked with the abuse of freedom. So much of the unhappiness that we visit upon ourselves derives from choices poorly made. So the self-healer must examine his own use of freedom, to see whether or not he is abusing it, and thereby causing himself pain and sorrow. So soon as man contemplates his free will, he thinks of it as a means of doing the opposite of God's will, though he finds that only by doing God's will does he find happiness. Yet, the notion of serving God sits ill with him, for he sees it as a sacrifice of his own will. Only in disillusion and suffering, in time, space and patience, does he come to the wisdom that his real will is the will of God, and in its practice is happiness and heaven. Cayce wants us to give our will a positive charge, a burst of creative energy, so that we can be proper channels for healing and manifestation of God's will. The key for the self-healer is receptivity. As the will is directive, as opposed to receptive, we have to attribute a positive charge to the will. No urge surpasses the individual will of an entity, that birthright of each soul, that gift of the creative forces that makes or causes the individuality in an entity, the ability to know itself to be itself and yet one with the creative forces. In using our will, we are making use of the positive charge, which attracts us to the negative charge of the earth, and so results in our being kept there. But when we become receptive and open, when we exercise, so to speak, the negative charge, we thus release ourselves from the ties which hold us to the earth. And so we are no longer at odds with the creative forces. What the self-healer must realize, then, is that to become skilled, he must obey the universal laws, use the will properly, and make the right choices. The individual is the one who chooses to change from being hard-headed, bigoted, short-sighted or in error. He does this himself. Whatsoever a man sows, and that means woman too, that must he reap, whether in the spiritual, mental or material activities. If one would be forgiven, one must oneself be forgiving in the relationships to others, and with what judgment? For some it will make the difference between judgments of others, and what one actually does. But how was the principle set by the Master? Thou hast read, thou shalt do this or that, but I say unto you, it is in mind, for mind is the builder. It is the attitude that counts. For one may lie just as much with a look as with words. The key to proper use of the will, and its freedom, is in development and self-knowledge. Through these, the soul can grow and reach its ideal, which is the creative force. With each development, that force, known upon the plane as will, is given to man over and above all creation, that force that may separate itself from its maker, for with the will, man may either adhere or contradict the divine law, those immutable laws, as are set between the Creator and the created. The study of these, through their phases and forms, and especially through any of those phases, wherein the carnal, or material, or normal forces are laid aside, and the ever-present elements of spirit and soul commune with those of the forces as found in each entity. Study those and know thyself. One may be free indeed in thought, though the body may be bound in chains, and be much more free than those who are chained by their own consciousness. Once the self-healer understands his freedom of will and the choices he ought to make, then he is urged by Cayce to grasp the notion of responsibility. For underlying the notions of freedom in Cayce's thought is the ever-recurrent note of our obligation to accept the consequences of our state and our choices. Responsibility, then, is really accountability. Each soul is accountable unto its maker for that it does with its opportunities at each and every turn of its experience in that we call life in the earth's plane. Let each individual know that it came into life with a purpose from God. Let each individual know that it is as a harp upon which the breath of God would play, as seekers for divine guidance, be uplifted, and thus may ye hasten the day. We often feel that we are treated unjustly, or that we deserve better than what we have. This is no doubt but a short and selfish view, and one that we must apply healing to. But the concept of responsibility dictates that we meet in the physical what we've done, or thought in the mental and the spiritual. So we have or meet those various aspects in the experience of each individual, for where there has been the constructive or destructive aspects in the experience of each individual, they must be met in that same sphere or plane of activity in which they have been in action in the experience of the entity, and met according to that which is to be meted. For what saith the law? As ye meet, so shall it be meted to thee in thine own experience, in thine own activity. So, as individuals in their material or mental experience in the material world find that they are in the activity of being mistreated, as from their own angle have they mistreated. If harshness has come to thine own experience, so has there been in thine own activity that which makes the same, and so is the experience in each phase. Responsibility tells us that we are here on this plane to learn and use what the Lord has given us. He has allowed us to become co-workers with Him in His healing apostolate, and we are responsible to ourselves and to Him to make use of that power and talent. This is left to the individual. The Lord can only offer man, as His child, as a co-creator with the creative forces, accepts or rejects. There's no halfway. You are or you are not. To be sure, there are various stages of unfoldment, of development, but use that thou knowest to do and the Lord will give thee the next step. He doesn't fail in His promises, even though ye may be far, far away. Although we are studying Cayce's healing techniques and methodology primarily for the purpose of self-healing, it should be evident that responsibility implies the use of such healing talents not just for ourselves, but also for others. Healing is knowledge of God, and that knowledge flowers when put to the service of others. The strong imperative that the seeking of the knowledge of the Father, of God, is correct, when used in the proper channel, yet may become destructive to self when gained as one who would become bigoted, or self-endowed with a superconsciousness of lording over others. Knowing then, in the humbleness of soul, of mind, of body, do we gain the manifold knowledge and glories of the divine reasons in the knowledge of the spiritual world, for God is spirit, and we must worship in spirit and in truth. Let this entity know that again there is found in Israel, him whom the gods have given the approach to the throne, even of the knowledge of the Holy One, and in all those relations let the will become subjugated to the will of the Father, that such knowledge as gained through dream, manifestation, vision may be given to a dying world, and give that people who would approach the living way the living water, and may they be again established in the holy way that leads to everlasting giving. The inmost feelings, the inmost life, a feeling such as makes the countenance, the physical exhibition of body, of mind, such as all who behold may know this one has approached the throne and brought away the shining light, ever the light by night and the cloud by day, presenting self in that manner that all manifestations will become in the way that will lend strength, shrouding doubt, fear, disappointments, distrust, in the depth in such a way that only the true, the holy light, will shine unto the end, guiding many to the way that leads to life everlasting. When one practices healing responsibility, he gains mercy and grace and love. He makes the choice of himself to those who need him. He manifests empathy, and not selfishness. These will make for activities, but in what manner? For the law of the Lord is perfect, and whatsoever an entity, an individual sows, that must he reap. That as law cannot be changed. As to whether one meets it in the letter of the law or in mercy, in grace, becomes the choice of the entity. If one would have mercy, grace, love, friends, one must show self in such a manner to those with whom one becomes associated. For like begets like. The self-healer must realize that he is responsible for whatever is happening to him. And accepting that responsibility is part and parcel of self-healing. For each soul must meet in its own self, that the entity or body meets to its fellow man in its ideal relations with such. This body is meeting its own self. For it is meeting its own shortcomings, when judged from some moral standards. This body, then, must first in its mental and spiritual attitude, make amends, not merely promises to others, but to self and the sources of health and of life itself. These should be the beginnings, and the body not merely being dependent upon the applications, which must be, or may be, made by others, for there are within self the conditions here taken, which now bring undesirable results in the ability of the body to function in the manner either physically or mentally as is most desirable. But there would be first a change in mental and spiritual attitude. A person anxious to accept responsibility for his own life and the things that happen to him, as well as eager to use his talents in a responsive manner, ought to really engage in deep soul-searching. For without an awareness of what happened and where one is going, responsibility becomes an empty word. For every soul, as every tub, must stand upon its own self. And the soul that holds resentment owes the soul to whom it is held much. Hast thou forgiven him the wrong done thee? Then thou owest naught. Do not attempt to be good, but rather good for something. Know what is thy purpose, what is thy goal. And unless these are founded in constructive, spiritual construction, they will turn again upon thyself. For each soul is meeting day by day self. Hence as has been given, know thyself, in whom thou believest. Not of earthly, not of material things, but mental and spiritual, and why. And by keeping a record of self, not as a diary, but thy purposes, what you have thought, what you have desired, the good that you have done, we will find this will bring physical and mental reactions that will be in keeping with the purposes for which each soul enters a material manifestation. We and we alone are responsible, then, for what we are and our condition on this earth. The individuality is the sum total of what the being has done about creative and ideal forces in its different experiences here on earth. The individuality changes as the entity acts, thinks and feels in the present about its ideals, its experiences, and its opportunities. Problems, conditions, individuals, all these cause a reaction in the individuality. Each phase of the being has its separate attributes, which may be either physical or spiritual or both. Also, they may be one. To accomplish this, the entity must use the mind and the soul. In fact, Cayce has told us often enough that the mind is the builder. It is the pathway to either infinity or materiality. The important lesson here for the self-healer is that Cayce rejects the concept of victim. The self-healer cannot blame anyone for his conditions or his illness. He begins the healing process when he starts to take responsibility for his condition. He starts on the road to health when he accepts that he is not the innocent victim of his environment. He is simply meeting self. What ye sow, ye reap. Apparently there are often experiences in which individuals reap that which they have not sown, but this is only the short self-vision of the entity, or the one analyzing or studying purposes and ideals in relationship to those particular individuals. From the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh, and thoughts are deeds. They each build to themselves that which is to the glorification, or edification, or resentment built in self. Then act in that way befitting that which responds in self. The self-healer finds it easier to accept responsibility when he accepts the power of choice that resides in this soul. He knows that responsibility also means that we are put on this earth for a purpose, therefore, we are accountable. As to the purposes, we find that there were those environs in which the attraction gave the opportunity for the entity, in bringing creative influences and forces in the experience, to meet self, and thus correct much that had been and is in the way of development for the soul entity. 4. Each soul enters that it may make its paths straight. For they alone who walk the straight and narrow way may know themselves to be themselves, and yet one with the creative forces. Hence the purpose for each entrance is that the opportunities may be embraced by the entity for living, being, that which is creative, and in keeping with the way. 4. The Father has not willed that any soul should perish, and is thus mindful that each soul has again and yet again, the opportunity for making its paths straight. We are not put on this earth just for a whim, or to satisfy someone else's need. We have purpose, and all things in the universe have purpose. This makes responsibility and freedom meaningful. We are not subject to the fates, nor are we doomed to dismal misfortunes. And the self-healer can brighten his own life and that of others by making himself aware of all the support that the purposefulness in the planet affords him. 4. It is not by chance that each entity enters, but that the entity, as a part of the whole, may fill that place which no other soul may fill so well. For he hath not willed that any soul should perish. Thus with each material manifestation, there is an undertaking by an entity to so manifest that it, as a part of the whole, may become more and more attuned to that consciousness, and thus glorify him in the entity's relationships to others in any and in every experience. Each soul was, is, and is to be a companion with that creative influence or force called God. Thus each entity is a child of God, or is a part of that whole. Thus the urges latent or manifested are expressions of an entity in the varied phases of consciousness. In the material, or earthly sojourn these find expressions, or manifestations. In the material, or earthly sojourn these find expressions, or manifestations in a three-dimensional manner. Each entity, thus, finds itself body, mind and soul. These phases represent the three spiritual attributes that are understandable, or comprehended in materiality. Yet as the mental and the spiritual become more and more expressive, or controlling through the experiences in the earth, the entity becomes aware of other dimensions in its material sojourn. Hence there may be the greater expression materially of mental and spiritual aspects of each soul. While body is subject to all the influences of materiality, it may be controlled, the emotions thereof, by the mind. And the mind may be directed by spirit. Spirit is that portion of the first cause which finds expression in all that is everlasting in the consciousness of mind or matter. Thus the manner in which a soul, an entity gives expression. And no urge, whether of the material sojourns or of the astrological aspects, surpasses the mental and spiritual abilities of a soul to choose its course that it, the soul and mind, may take. In materiality, then, as may be expressed in whatever environ a body has chosen, it becomes accustomed, or attuned to the environs of that particular sphere of activity. Yet these may become localized, or they may become state or nation-minded, or spiritual or fellow-man-minded, thereby altering the manner in which the entity may express itself, though under the same environ of others in that particular sphere of activity. When we speak of responsibility and freedom as vital to the concept of soul in the thought of Cayce, we must bring in his idea of karma. What is karma? It is a word very much in use today, and Cayce himself used it often enough. Remember that Cayce believed in the law of cause and effect. He said that whatever was happening to us was not the result of chance, but rather self meeting self. We reap what we sow. Karma, then, is cause and effect in action. The Bible is filled with similar, if not identical concepts. As ye do unto others, so shall it be done unto thee. Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, so that shall he also reap. Jesus put it well when he said, Verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no ways pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. And again, I tell thee, thou shalt not depart thence till thou hast paid the very last mite. And elsewhere, Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. Karma implies that man can only learn by doing, for he truly knows only what he has experienced. It says that growth comes through adversity. The word karma, then, is used by Cayce in a philosophical sense to indicate conditions in the present stemming from thoughts and actions in the past. Its Sanskrit meaning encompasses both action and reaction, or consequences. Its Hindu meaning implies work, or the labor of the soul seeking to attain union with God. Today, most people think of karma as the law of cause and effect. What Cayce is telling us is that every effect has its cause. Accidents are the exception and hardly the rule. What this means for the self-healer is that he must realize that he will pay for even his most hidden thoughts and deeds, not only now, but in the future. Realizing that is the beginning of wisdom and the key to right living. Karma is the operation of a law so ordered and precise that it generates a constant flow of justice. We are constantly creating new karma for ourselves in the choices we make, the decision we reach. Sometimes the reaction is instant. More often than not, it is delayed in this life or the next. A nation that brings war on another, says Cayce, will have war brought upon it. That's karma. This is a very important facet of understanding for the healer. Humans are not simple beings, but are quite complex. Each thought, each word, each act adds to the total structure of man's nature, says Cayce. And it all becomes the fabric of the karmic patterns. Mind is the builder, and so no effort is ever misspent. Thought upon thought, line upon line, we build that which we are and will be in the future. The circumstances in which we find ourselves are just what we have earned. It is what we need or what we deserve. We have no one to blame. And what we do today is what we are going to get for ourselves today and tomorrow, for man is indeed the captain of his soul, the master of his fate. Have I karma from any previous existence that should be overcome? Well, that karma be understood, and how it is to be met. For, in various thought, whether considered philosophy or religion, or whether from the more scientific manner of cause and effect, karma is all of these and more. Rather it may be likened unto a piece of food, whether fish or bread, taken into the system, it is assimilated by the organs of digestion, and then those elements that are gathered from same are made into the forces that flow through the body, giving the strength and vitality to an animate object, or being, or body. So, in experiences of a soul, in a body, in an experience in the earth. Its thoughts make for that upon which the soul feeds, as do the activities that are carried on from the thought of the period make for the ability of retaining or maintaining the active force or active principle of the thought through the experience. Then, the soul re-entering into a body under a different environ either makes for the expending of that it has made through the experience in the sojourn in a form that is called in some religions as destiny of the soul, in another philosophy that which has been builded must be met in some way or manner, or in the more scientific manner that a certain cause produces a certain effect. Hence we see that karma is all of these and more. What more? Ever since the entering of spirit and soul into matter there has been a way of redemption for the soul, to make an association and a connection with the Creator, through the love for the Creator that is in its experience. Hence this, too, must be taken into consideration, that karma may mean the development for self, and must be met in that way and manner, or it may mean that which has been acted upon by the cleansing influences of the way and manner through which the soul, the mind-soul, or the soul-mind is purified, or to be purified, or purifies itself, and hence those changes come about, and some people term it lady luck, or the body is born under a lucky star. It's what the soul-mind has done about the source of redemption of the soul. Or it may be yet that of cause and effect, as related to the soul, the mind, the spirit, the body. In a reading to a male, 41, who suffered from severe spinal deterioration, Cayce gave this understanding of karma. This is not intended other than that the entity in its seeking should indeed interpret the law of the Lord. For what is stated in his word isn't fooling. It means what it says. The law of the Lord is perfect. It converteth the soul. If the soul be perfect in its purpose and ideal, whatever the state may be, it will call on the Lord. It will rely on the Lord. It will use every measure to comply with his will and purpose. His purpose was for man to subdue, to conquer, to use, to apply the earth in its every use for man. When it was given, whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That is, in this case, the blood of his will, of this purpose, of this physical desire to carry on in his own ways of activity, and by those conditions in the body itself being thwarted. The entity thwarted others and is meeting it in self. That is karma. Some people are afraid of karma. They allow it to beat them down, to turn them into cowards. Cayce teaches us that karma is not to be feared, but to be accepted and handled. Those interested in self-healing can learn from him how to deal with karma and their own misconception of this law. Each entity, each soul, enters the material experience for purposes. These are not individual or of a selfish nature, though they are very personal in their application and their practice. Each soul meets constantly itself, not alone in what is called at times karma, or karmic influences. For remember, life is God, that which is constructive grows, that which is destructive deteriorates. Then, karmic forces, if the life application in the experience of an individual is made towards constructiveness, it grows and grows. For the individual entity grows to a haven of peace and harmony and understanding, or ye grow to heaven, rather than going to heaven. Ye grow in grace, in knowledge, in understanding. Then, what is the purpose of this entity's experience in this particular phase and time and period? To many the entity is far in advance of its time, its period, it having caught a vision as from the mount, and the vibration, or the sun of light has risen for the entity, only to be shaded by selfish indulgences in the minds of those that have directed not the entity. Remember then as this, there are promises made by the creative forces or God to the children of men, that if ye will be my daughter, my son, my child, I will indeed be thy God. This is an individual promise. Hence the purposes are for an entrance that the soul may be prepared for an indwelling with the soul, the mind of a living God. How, then, ye ask, are ye to know when ye are on the straight and narrow way? My spirit beareth witness, with thy spirit, that ye are indeed the children of God. How? Thy God consciousness, thy soul, either condemns, rejects or falters before conditions that exist in the experience of the mental and material self. Mind ever is the builder. In concluding this chapter on the soul, we would do well to realize that Cayce has given us quite a bit to consider. In brief summary, then, the self-healer must accept the reality and power of the soul, trying to understand its relationship to the mind and body. In attempting to bring about healing for the total entity, the self-healer must realize that balance depends on a proper use of freedom and an acceptance of responsibility. What Cayce taught about karma merely underscores the importance of spiritual laws that must be understood and adhered to. We find in Venus the love, the timidity, the tendency at times for criticism. Learn the lesson well of the spiritual truth, criticize not unless ye wish to be criticized. 4. With what measure ye mete it is measured to thee again. It may not be in the same way, but ye cannot even think bad of another without it affecting thee in a manner of a destructive nature. Think well of others, and if ye cannot speak well of them, don't speak. But don't think it either. Try to see self in the other's place. And this will bring the basic spiritual forces that must be the prompting influence in the experience of each soul, if it would grow in grace, in knowledge, in understanding, not only of its relationship to God, its relationship to its fellow man, but its relationship in the home and in the social life. 4. Know the Lord thy God is one. And all that ye may know of good must first be within self. All ye may know of God must be manifested through thyself. To hear of him is not to know. To apply and live and be is to know.